We're in chapter 9. Look at verses, we'll read chapter 9, starting in verse 1, and we'll read through the first 7 verses. Somebody like to do that for us?
Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. The fear and dread of you will fall upon all the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the air and upon every creature that moves along the ground and upon all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. But you must not eat meat that has its lifeblood still in it. And for your lifeblood, I will surely demand an account. I will demand an accounting from every animal and from each man too. I will demand an accounting for the life of his fellow man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made man. You said through 8?
Through 7.
7. As for you, be fruitful and increase in number, multiply on the earth and increase upon it.
All right, so this is what we talked about last week. So what were some of the things that we discussed from this passage here? Anybody remember?
Meat was meant for food, animals were meant for food.
Yeah. Prior to this point in history, man was what?
Vegetarian.
Yeah, vegetarian, right? They would eat all the fruit and trees and vegetation. But here, God institutes a change. They're now allowed to eat, it says all of the animals, it's all for food for them now. So there's been a change here. So we talked a little bit about that. What else is some of the things we talked about last week that's going on in this text?
The first thing Noah did was he built an altar, and the Lord smelled a soothing aroma.
Absolutely. That was in 8:20 through the end of the chapter. So that's right. We talked about that last week. What were some of the things that we said about that altar and the sacrifice? And
It was priority to God.
yeah, it's a priority. There's multiple kind of things going on there, but one of them is the first thing he does is he sacrifices to God. And there's thanks that goes on. He's thankful to God and grateful, and God is number one in his life, so that's what he's going to do. And so we talked about that as well. Giving of, the Old Testament talks about giving of your first fruits and things of that nature, which is really just a physical way of acting out your faith, your hope, your trust in God, that God is number one in your life, and money or food or any of these other things are not number one. So you give him the first. And so that's what we see Noah here doing. Noah is just, God is number one, very thankful that he brought him through the flood and all of that. And so he's offering thanksgiving up to God. What else? What else did we talk about in chapter 9, verses 1 through 7? What's that? Yeah, not drinking blood, right? So God says you can eat animals now, but you're not allowed to eat the blood, right? You can't eat meat with blood in it. That doesn't mean you order a rare steak or something like that. It's talking about that you haven't drained the blood out of the animal. And specifically, why does God say that?
Disease.
Well, he doesn't say disease in this text, but there definitely could be disease. What? The life is in the blood. So there's something sacred about the blood. God, in some ways it's sacred, it's holy, and it's meant to be poured out. It's meant to not to be consumed by humans. And Tim, I believe you had mentioned a possible connection between the blood of Christ. So symbolically connecting that with Jesus to come, the precious blood of Jesus. So there may very well be something there with that connection. But God says the life is in the blood. Don't eat meat with it, which means you're not going to drink it. You're not going to do anything like that. There were pagan practices of eating, and drinking blood and things of that nature. And in fact, there's still people who do that today, aren't there? They eat blood sausage.
Well, didn't there used to be the knowledge of cannibals, and they.
Oh, well, there's definitely people, there were cannibals. There may very well still be cannibals out there in some parts of the world. Yeah, that would certainly be against God. That's for sure. But even just talking about meat and the blood in animals and things of that nature, you can buy, I think you can still buy blood sausage. And blood pudding. And we kind of talked about that last week. Not only does that sound nasty to me, but, God says don't eat that stuff. So we've got the meat. We don't need the blood kind of thing. So steer clear of that, guys, right? Don't eat that.
It's bad enough eating the liver.
Yeah, right, yeah.
That's what all the time.
Right. So we talked a little bit about that. So God says that humans are not to murder. We talked about this. You remember that? We kind of ended on this. Humans are not to murder other humans. He says you can eat meat of other animals, but if an animal kills a man, God wants that animal to be reckoned, right? He wants that animal to be taken out. And we would do that today, right? You've heard of maybe dogs being put to sleep because they've attacked another human. That's a good thing to do because a lot of times if an animal does it once, they're likely to do it again, right? But then God says man is not to shed other people's blood, right? And from man, do not kill other men. And it's not just the idea of taking life. What is God saying? Man is not to, we have an M word for it. Murder, right? Murder is different than taking the life of someone because God will go on to say, if someone takes the life of a human, by humans, their life is to be taken. So it's not on equal grounds, right? Because then you'd say, well, then that person needs to be killed too, whoever took the, right? So God is making a distinction here between people who are murdering and they need to be put to death. Now, why would that be? According to this text, but go ahead.
For the same reason you said about the animals.
Yes.
If they'll do it once, it becomes less distasteful to that person, so they'll do it again.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, it's God's punishment.
Yes, absolutely. So if a person is willing to murder another human being, they're likely to do it again. Or it's very likely they could do it again, right? I mean, if they've done it once, it's possible to do it. Now, we're not talking about accidental murder, right? Even our laws today make a distinction, don't they? There's first-degree murder, second-degree murder, third-degree murder. Trying to make a distinction between, was this an accident or was this premeditated? Did somebody, really want to take this person out? And so God is saying that's not going to happen. And why does he say in the text, specifically why does he say in the text?
What text are you looking at, James? I'm sorry.
That's all right. We're looking at chapter 9, and we're looking at verse 6, really.
What was the question?
The question is, why does God say that people are not allowed to kill other people?
We're made in God's image.
Yeah, we're made in God's image. So if somebody attacks another human, who are they attacking? Yeah, it's a frontal assault on God. They're attacking the very image of God. And here's something that we really need to get a hold of. And we talked about it last week. We're going to talk about it again. What does it mean to be created in the image of God?
God created us in his image, then that means, there's something special about us. He put something in us that he didn't put in any other aspect of creation.
Absolutely. There's something different, right?
Yes.
What's that?
He puts the spirit in us.
He breathes, right? Breathes the breath of life in the nostrils of Adam and all of that, and he becomes a living being. So created in the image of God does not mean that we have an intellect, though some people think so. But if you think that the image of God means that you have an intellect or are able to have relationships, what happens to the mentally challenged? Are they fully in the image of God now? Or do we start to look at them as less in the image of God?
No. They are in the image of God.
Yeah, everyone is in the image of God. But if we say that the image of God means a person has an intellect. Well, the less that they have an intellect, the less in the image of God they are. And the more somebody has great intellect, the more in the image of God, right? There becomes this degree. The reason I'm pointing this out is because throughout church history, there have been people who claim the name of Christ who have said the image of God relates to how well a person can have a relationship with others, how much intellect they have, those kind of things. And they taught that those who are handicapped, those who are mentally challenged, those who are all the way down the line. And I think, Bernie, you mentioned last week color. I think it was you, right? Color of skin. Some people have looked at people as being less in the image of God if they're of a different color, different race, different ethnicity. The image of God is not changed just because somebody... we talked about Ethan last week. Ethan has autism. It's some kind of a mental deficiency, right? He doesn't communicate as well as other people. He doesn't hold relationships as well as other people, those kind of things. But is he still in the image of God?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So this is important because every single human being throughout history, forever, is created in the very image of God, which means everyone has dignity. Everyone. Everyone has honor. Everyone should be respected. Everyone. And so here we start to see that development. Because man is created in the image of God, you're not allowed to murder another human being. You're attacking God, and there's a dignity and a respect and an honor in absolutely every single human being, whether they have something physically or mentally wrong with them or not. So keep that in mind. Don't ever equate the image of God with something like that. Now, we share certain characteristics with God as well, right? God is creative. Some people are creative. I would say that's a reflection of God's character. There's something in us that's creative, but not everybody's good at painting or whatever. But it's different than the image of God. Anybody have any questions, thoughts, concerns on that?
God gives everybody a gift. I mean,
That's true. Everybody has some kind of
it's not,
ability.
I look at it like this. I mean, that would become like saying no children should be allowed to live because they're not the image of God, because they haven't went through the trials and tribulations of life to become an upright man yet, or an upright woman. You know what I'm saying? Like, God puts those things in our way for a reason. He puts those things in our way so we'll overcome them and grow stronger in our faith and our belief in Him.
Mm-hmm.
So just because somebody is not on the same level as everybody else, that doesn't mean we are not the image of God. We are just not at that level with.
Yeah, right. We're at different levels, maybe intellectually or creatively or something like that. But what makes us all equal, at least in this sense, is that every one of us is created in the image of God. So we ought to be respecting and loving and caring for absolutely everyone. Does it matter what skin color they are? No. For we're all one blood. We all go back to Adam and Eve, right? We're all family. Yes?
It's mostly the intelligent, supposedly, people that don't believe in God,
Yeah.
or that are atheists, or they're searching. But innocent children and people with mental handicaps, they are more in tune with God than the intelligent.
Right, yeah.
You know?
Paul will make that point, right? Not many of you were of noble birth. Not many of you were intellectuals, that kind of things, right? Absolutely. Yeah. All right. So God says humans aren't to murder other humans, and if they do, they're to be killed. This has to do with the beginnings of kind of a government. Go ahead, Mike. Did you want to say something?
Well, I didn't want to interrupt you there. On chapter 6, verse 6 there, what about the military defending the country?
Yeah, well, see, that becomes a question of government. And God institutes government, and we are to honor and respect government. Now, this passage here, again, I think is in relation to this idea of a government system, a law system that has to start out. What he's not saying is, Mike, if somebody kills someone in your family, go and kill them. Right? It has to do with a society. It's starting the basis of some kind of a law system, a governmental system. So, governments need armies, things of that nature. Now, what we end up with is a struggle between an individual signing up to do military service and then going to where Jesus talks about turning the other cheek or those kind of things, right? And so we get into a struggle with, what was it mentioned last week? Conscientious objectors, right? Tim, you brought that up, did you? I think you did? No? Someone else brought it up? Okay. So individually, each Christian is going to have to decide for themselves what they think. And they're going to have to go to the text. I know plenty of Christians who are adamantly against going to war, taking the life of another person. I know plenty of other Christians who say that we should defend and we should, protect the innocent and those who are being abused, and they would view it in that light. So I think it's a struggle for the individual. This doesn't say anything about that. Do you know what I mean? This is talking about government. You have to have laws and you have to have rules. And part of the law and part of the rule is if you murder, that life should be taken. Because you're likely to do it again. And if we don't have laws, then we end up with anarchy and chaos reigns, and people go around murdering and stealing and doing whatever they want anyways. And we already have a lot of that now. Can you imagine what it would be like without any kind of laws? Difficult stuff.
Of course, Romans 13 says that God created the governments.
That's right. That's right. Jesus told Pilate you'd have no authority unless it was given to you from above. So Daniel worked for the government. Some people want to say Christians shouldn't work for the government. Daniel did. Daniel worked for a corrupt government, a wicked government. And yet he honored God. So again, some of these things are going to be personal issues. Now, should we as Christians individually forgive even if somebody's murdered one of our family members or something?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That says nothing about what the government should do. That says nothing about the societal norms where we need to keep things orderly, right? And not chaotic and all of that kind of stuff. But these are things that Christians debate and they discuss. I think it really comes down to the individual. If you don't, Paul will even say that the government doesn't wield the sword for no reason, right? It's there to correct and take care of those who break the law and those who would be climbing in your windows at night. Go ahead.
I think it's important in my line of thinking to make that distinction and differentiation, to not refer to like our nation as a Christian nation, but rather a nation predominantly of Christians. Because to put a soul status on a nation is not, it doesn't fit.
Yeah, some people want to make America kind of like an Israel. The nation of Israel was a theocracy. It was a nation governed by God. God was meant to be the king, and we see what happens when people go astray and he gives them a king and all that. But they were meant to be one nation under God, literally. And they had these laws, and God was meant to be the ruler and all of that kind of stuff. But America's not that way. And if you look at the New Testament is individualized. It's now gone from a national kind of thing. And the nation of Israel, and we will eventually possibly get into this idea, Israel was a vehicle to bring about the Messiah. So there were certain things that needed to go on. It needed to be a nation. It needed to protect itself. It needed to be holy. It needed to be separate so that the Christ could come through that. Now the Christ has come. He's come and he's done his work. He's died on the cross, all that. So now it's an individual thing where we go into the nations, all nations. And we talk about the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, right? It's small, starts out small and grows and spreads and multiplies and like leaven in bread and all that. So the New Testament is more geared towards the individual now and not some kind of a theocracy. So America's not a theocracy, and we shouldn't look at it that way. There are Christians in Germany, in Japan, and all over the world. We wouldn't say that they're Christian nations. We say there's Christians in those nations. So I would agree with you, Tim. And I think we need to stop looking at it like America is another Israel. It's not. And the promises to Israel were the promises to Israel, not to America. Go ahead.
The United States was founded, though, on Christian principles.
Sure.
And the reason it was founded was for the freedom of religion.
Yes.
So I think that's where that comes from,
Yeah, there are some people who want to make it more a Christian nation than it even was originally intended, to be honest. But yeah, there were Judeo-Christian ideas, but there were also Greco-Roman ideas. If you look at the system of government, it's actually a Greco-Roman system of government. It was meant to be a democratic republic. And so there's a lot of those kind of ideas that go on there too. But yeah, you can get into all of those kind of things. Some of them are important, but if you just remember that the issue of the New Testament is the individual. God says to you, Christ comes to us and he says, I want you to love your enemies, do good to those who persecute you. He's not saying the government is to do that. He's saying you're to do that. The government has to do law, right? And Bernie had already mentioned, God is the one who institutes governments. Paul said, we honor the government. Peter said, you honor the government, pray for the emperor, all that kind of stuff. They're there. God has placed them there for a purpose and for a reason, and it's to make sure that, to the best of their ability kind of thing, that we don't all get abused all the time. Now, governments go corrupt, absolutely, and they'll be held accountable to God. Anybody in position of authority and power is held accountable by God, whether they use that for good or bad. Again, look at Daniel. Look at the people that were ruling there and Nebuchadnezzar and people like that, held accountable by God for what they do.
And
So,
it has to be a heart thing too, definitely.
yes, absolutely.
For example, you got a stop sign up here, it says stop. If your heart says just go on, forget about it, you violated the law, you may not be caught, but your heart's not in it.
Absolutely. 100%. That's right. Your heart's got to be there as well. So it's an internal thing as well.
I've got a granddaughter that would disagree with Bernie on that. The stop sign, that's merely a suggestion. I've heard that it means skip tops and payment.
Somebody put it this way. Somebody said, you got a person who, school zones are like what, 20 miles an hour? I think typically they're 20 miles an hour. He said, you got somebody who doesn't have a kid in that school and they go through at 30, 40 miles an hour. You got somebody who has a kid at that school, they're going 20 miles an hour. There's a whole different heart, right? There's something different that goes on there.
I think you see this a lot in child care, which brings about foster parents. Because the law says that you are responsible for taking care of your child. But if you don't take care of your child, the law comes in and takes the child. Now, the reason you don't take care of your child, you don't really love that child. You don't really care for that child. And you let things happen that should not happen as a parent.
Sure, absolutely. There are people that abuse their children or neglect their children, all those kind of things. Absolutely. All right, so we got way far away from Genesis chapter 9. But it's all right because, the idea of law and government and stuff is really in a nutshell kind of found here. And it's found here with this important idea of murder. And if we think about it, you remember that this is a new beginning, right? Noah is a new Adam, right? So this is a new creation, right? We went through all of the texts and in fact, the way it is presented, it's like you took Genesis chapter 1 and transported it into chapter, 8 and all of that, where there's this recreation. God uncreates and then he recreates, right? And so here is the beginning of humanity again. Now, what was one of the first sins of humanity? One of the first that's recorded.
Noah got drunk.
Well, yes, but way back in the beginning,
Oh,
uh,
Cain killed Abel.
Cain killed Abel, right? So there's a murder that goes on here. God, the brand new humanity again. God says, this is what we should not be doing, what Cain did to Abel. So you see the parallels back there again. God is trying to say, okay, this isn't what you're supposed to do, right? Don't take life. Whether or not Cain knew that, I think he knew he wasn't to do that. But here God is kind of putting this law out there. And again, there's a connection to Genesis chapters 1 through 3, really. Well, 4. All right, if there's nothing else.
But what about self-defense?
Right. Everybody asks the self-defense question. Thought we were going to get by without that. Self-defense. In my mind, I think it all depends on the context. Somebody comes up to me, to you, beats us up, throws us in jail, says you're here because you're a Christian. What do we do?
Go to jail.
Go to jail. Somebody is going to break in your house and murder your family.
Protect your family.
Right? Right? So context and individual situations. I think it's a bad idea to paint everything in a general scheme of things. Say, oh, you're always to turn the other cheek. Well, depending on context, I think, absolutely. I'm walking with my 5-year-old and somebody wants to, do something to me or to her or what. I mean, I find it hard to believe that the God of the universe would say, yes, let that person, abuse you and your child and all that. I just don't think that's the case. So context is key. But again, it's still very difficult to turn the other cheek. And we're called to do that. Again, context, depending on the context and all of that. We're called to love our enemies, do good to those who persecute us. That's a difficult thing to do, but that's what we're called to do. So context, individuals are going to struggle with that. Some of these things really do come down to an individual wrestling with what God has called them to do and their conscience over the whole issue. It's context as far as I'm concerned. It's situational, what's going on. And sometimes we make the wrong choice in a situation. Sometimes we make the right choice. But we all got to struggle with that. If somebody's going to come into my house and try to harm my family, I'm safe to say, I feel safe to say that God would ask me to protect those ones that he's put me in charge of. Right?
They are the voiceless, and we are to protect the voiceless. So,
Adam failed at his job of being the protector, you remember?
Yeah.
He failed at his job of being a protector. And now we're specifically talking about the man, but the man is meant to protect the family, the household, all of that kind of stuff. So Adam failed in that. We want to make sure we don't fail in that. But again, whatever is in your power, whatever God has put you as a steward of, especially your family, things of that nature, I feel confident to say God wants you to protect those people that he's put you in charge of, that he wants you to protect. Somebody else might disagree, but I'm going to protect my family, and do it to God's glory and to his honor. If somebody says, we're going to take you away because you believe in Jesus, that's a different story. That's a different story. But still, again, it's not going to be an easy. It's a difficult struggle. All right, let's move on to look at verses, bless you,
Thank you.
8 through 17. Let's look at 8 through 17. Somebody else want to read the text?
God spoke unto Noah and to his sons with them, saying, And I behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you. That is with you of the fowl, of the cattle, of every beast of the earth with you, from all that go out of the ark to every beast of the earth. And I will establish my covenant with you, neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of the flood, neither shall there be a flood destroy the earth. And God said, This is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of the covenant between me and the earth, and it shall come to pass when I bring a cloud over the earth, and the bow shall be seen in the cloud. How far did he say?
Through 17.
And I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and all waters shall no more become a flesh for all flesh. And the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon earth. God said unto Noah, this is the token of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is upon the earth.
All right, thank you. All right, so what is God doing in this section here, this long section that we read? What's he doing?
Making a promise.
Outlining his promise and read. He's like,
Okay, making a promise, making a covenant. What's the word testament? You know what the word testament means?
that's his word. That's what he's speaking.
Covenant.
Covenant. Testament, covenant. How many covenants are there in the Bible?
Many.
Many. Yeah, there's all kinds. Yeah.
Oh, two.
No, they're not two. There's not.
You're the one that's right. I'm
Yeah,
gonna say,
there's not the Old Testament, Old Covenant, and the New Testament, the New Covenant. There's more than that. Yeah, and that's the point, right? Sometimes we think that the Bible contains only two covenants. We think about the Old Covenant. We call, the whole Old Testament, the Old Testament. It's the Old Covenant, right? And then the New Covenant. And actually here we see that there's more than that. God is making a covenant here. And who's he making the covenant with?
Noah
Noah.
and all the people that follow.
And all the people that follow. And all living creatures. And the earth. I mean, this is a covenant with not just one human or a family or all humanity. This is a covenant with the entire earth, right? The created order, at least on the earth here. How long is the covenant good for? Yeah, it's forever. It's in a sense an eternal covenant, a covenant with the earth, at least so long as the earth and all of that kind of. So it's not going to end. This is one of those covenants that's not superseded or done away with or something like that. What is the sign of the covenant?
Rainbow.
The rainbow.
Isn't
rainbow,
it
yeah.
beautiful to see a rainbow?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That's
It is,
God's
yeah.
covenant with us.
Yeah, we saw a huge one that I actually saw one. I've only seen it once, and it was super bright, and it covered the whole sky. It touched, but I don't know if have you ever seen that? Oh my goodness, I've seen partial ones and things like that. This one was over the thing. I'm like, I can see the end of the rainbow, looking for the end of the rainbow. It's pretty neat. But you know what I thought of? I thought of God. I thought about the covenant. I thought about that. And so God says with this covenant, what is the covenant promise that he says?
Not destroy the world by water again.
He's not going to destroy the earth or all flesh, all humanity with water again. Has he kept his promise?
Yeah.
Okay, so was the flood a global flood or was it a local flood?
It was global.
Has to be global, right? Not just all humanity was wiped out, but the whole earth. It had to be. Otherwise, this covenant here doesn't make any sense, right? And if it was a local flood, then God has broken his promise over and over and over and over again, right? You've got tsunamis and all kinds of things that happen in places, but never to wipe out the whole earth again. So here is one more proof to say that this was a global flood, not simply a local flood. Is it important that we understand that God is a covenant maker and a covenant keeper?
Yes.
Why?
Amen.
Why?
We need to trust God. He is powerful.
Mhm.
He is all-knowing.
Absolutely.
He knows our hearts before our thought is in our brain. He knows what is in our heart.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if God is a covenant maker and a covenant keeper, we can have faith when he makes a promise to us, when he makes a covenant with us, right? All right. That's important. So here God has kept his promises. This is just one more of those, one more evidence that we can trust God. God kept his promise way back then. He's kept it throughout the centuries, and he hasn't broken that promise. The flood waters will never consume the whole earth again. The earth will never be destroyed by water again. He keeps his promises. This is just one of those that we can look to and say, he made a promise, he made a covenant, he's kept it. So when he makes a covenant with you and me, we can have assurance that he will keep it. What is the promise? What is the covenant that he has made with you? Everlasting life in Christ. Forgiveness of sins. All of that good stuff, right? Resurrection from the dead. All of that good stuff. Can you have assurance? Absolutely.
Yes.
And one of the proofs, again, one of the evidences, bless you, is that we see that he kept his promise way, way, way back to Noah and to all humanity and to the earth. He will never again destroy the earth like that. He kept his promise back then. He's going to keep his promise to you and me. There's just more assurance. Every time you see God make a covenant with someone, you be reminded that he's a covenant maker and not a covenant breaker. He's a covenant keeper, which again gives us assurance that if we will be in that covenant with him, we can have that assurance that he won't break it. That's right. His word is bond. His word is law. His word is good, right? You can take that to the bank. We're out of time. Any last questions, thoughts, concerns, comments, anything like that?